Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased that you've decided to join me to take a look at U.S. history. We try to take a look at U.S. history from a variety of different angles, try to identify the story behind the story. Sometimes we try to look at the odd things that have happened, and certainly examine the personalities that have made the American experience so unique in all the history of the world. In particular, we take a look at the U.S. Constitution, this wonderful document that has governed this country for well over 200 years. And we try to understand some of the complications and some of the problems that we face as a nation, day by day, year by year, month by month. In any event, I hope you're enjoying this and that you come back often, because I will keep repeating these and posting them to YouTube so that you can relive the experience if you want to do it more than once. And I hope you do. Anyway, welcome and enjoy the presentations.
So anyways, you see these scenes that are here. We have the Holocaust that eventually emerges at the end of the process, the rise of Hitler, the rise of Roosevelt, actually the consolidation of Stalin during this period when he has his most vicious period, I guess I'll just say. Anyway, so we're going to talk the road to war, basically mostly from 1930 on, but the war, the origins of it go back to 1919. Germany, after the Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty, more than anything else, caused World War II. Germany, at the end, in the Versailles Treaty, and by the way, it's interesting, today, by the way, is the 11th, is Veterans Day, used to be called Armistice Day, and it's observed because on the 11th day, in the 11th hour of the 11th month, they signed the ceasefire. It was not the treaty, not the Versailles Treaty, it was the ceasefire. And so we stopped fighting at that point. Then later, they negotiated the Versailles Treaty when Wilson went to Europe and so forth. In that treaty, Germany is blamed for the war. And they lost all of their foreign colonies, and there were quite a few of them. And new countries were formed out of what had been Germany. And they were required to pay these enormous war debts. There was vengeance in the air. They wanted vengeance for what had happened to them. So what we have during this period is the Great Depression events that lead up to this. First of all, U.S. investors, and there were a lot of them, because the United States by the 1920s and 30s was a prosperous country. They put their money with the Wall Street bankers. The Wall Street bankers then issued private loans. The private loans largely went to places like Germany, big money. Germany had, at the end of the war debt payments it was required to make. Reparations, we call them. And they went to countries like France, and they went to Great Britain. Then Great Britain had a responsibility because it had borrowed 1 ton of a lot of money from the United States. It had allied war debt payments it had to make to the U.S. Treasury. Can you see the vicious circle that you have that emerges here? In addition to that, we had on top of this the Hawley-Smoot tariff, which was a very high tariff. Great Britain and France were therefore discouraged from trading with the United States. We became an economic isolationist. Because of this, Great Britain and France did not pay back their war debts to the United States because they didn't have the money. And they defaulted on their obligations to the United States. And so in the fall of 1929, the stock market crashes. And then the investors lose millions, and the businesses at the same time lose profits. You can see the circle of bad things happening there. And so then we have the consumers' spendings drop, businesses began to stop, and the markets began to fall. The banks, the businesses and workers can't repay their bank loans. The banks run out of money and they fail. We had thousands of banks that failed. The bank runs occurred. So we have this terrible circle of things happening. In terms of the world payments, again, I'm saying the real thing. Same thing I said in the previous slide. Overall, U.S. production plummets. The U.S. investors have little money left. The U.S. investments in Germany decline. Germany war debts to allies fall off. The Europeans can't afford American goods, and the allies can't afford to pay their debts. And so we've got a vicious circle that goes on and on and on and on. We don't get out of the Great Depression until what happens? World War II. Takes a world war to finally get us out of this circle. It is a terrible thing to say. We invent in the Versailles Treaty this thing called the League of Nations, a permanent allegiance where people were to come together and love each other, and there's never going to be any war again. And you see the nations here that are briefly out. This isn't a great map, but it shows the members who were part of the League of Nations. The ineffectiveness, the League of Nations was only described as a weak and ineffective organizations. I like people to look at this picture of these gentlemen who are sitting there and to remind them that I guess there is somewhere in here a woman, but there were no women participating in international affairs, leadership roles in international affairs during this period. And shame on them, because they might have kept us a little more at peace. There was no control of major conflicts in the world. And there was no progress in disarmament. As a matter of fact, there was an expansion of armament during the period. And there was no effective military force to stop a conflict if one began to emerge. Notice here, these a list of the nations of the world during this period who at one time belonged to the League of Nations. And you notice the blue will basically tell you the ones that withdrew or stopped their membership, or some of them were expelled. The USSR was finally expelled from the League of Nations. And some were taken over by Italy, like Ethiopia and Albania. So then we have international agreements that played a role during this period, or attempts to do things. Several attempts to disarm. There was the Washington Disarmament Conference in 1921-22. The Geneva Convention, which is still looked to today in 1929, that set up a bunch of rules for international conflict. There were treaties with Japan to keep Japan at peace. Japan had finally begun to try some democracy in the 1920s. There was the Kellogg-Briand Pact in 1928. Kellogg was from Minnesota, which I know him. He was Secretary of State. And they had, in 1928, it was a marvelous treaty. It made war illegal. It said, you can't have war. It's illegal. Bad, 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 bad. There was only one problem with it. There was no way to enforce it. It was just piece of paper with no club behind it. This is what Japan did when it invaded Manchuria in 1931. And notice that it broke through the 9-Power Treaty, the Kellogg Pact, the League of Nations Covenant, the World Court, and all of these things. They just rammed right through them and ignored them totally. Japan was becoming a real bully in this period.
Was Manchuria part of China then?
Manchuria had been part of China. And I'm going to mention more about that, but just Japan invaded it, and then I'll tell you why they invaded it and took it over, and they turned it into a puppet country called Manchukuo. The Young Plan was a program for settlement of German reparations after World War I in 1929, and this was then put into place after the Dawes Plan from 1924, when it became apparent that Germany was no way going to be able to pay the debts that they had. The Young Plan set the total reparations to be paid out over 58.5 years. And Germany felt the full impact of the economic depression, and a moratorium was called in 31-32, which is just before the advent of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, who were not popular during this period. They become popular because there's a depression and the people are desperate. Adolf Hitler took over in Germany in 1933. He defaulted and said, I ain't going to pay that bill. That's not my bill. I don't like it anyway, so I'm not going to pay it. After Germany's defeat in World War II, an international conference decided that Germany would pay the remaining debt only after the country was reunified, which, as you know, took a while until the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc collapsed all around 1989 to 91. West Germany paid off the principal by 1980. Then in 1995, after reunification, German government announced it would resume payment, and finally it was paid off in 2010. So it finally was done, but it was an agonizing process. The Locarno Pact of 1925 included or had Austen Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, Aristide Briand, the French Prime Minister, Gustav Stresemann in Germany, and it guaranteed the common boundaries of Belgium, France, and Germany as specified in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Germany signed the treaties with Poland and Czechoslovakia, agreeing to exchange the eastern borders of Germany by arbitration only. Now, these are the laws, if you would, that were in effect from 1925 until Hitler steamrolled over them and didn't pay any attention to them whatsoever. They were trying, they just weren't succeeding. In 1931, Japan goes into Manchuria, and you see where Japan is. It's the brown, and Manchuria is that northern part of China. And China, remember, at this period, is very, very weak, very poorly organized, lots of internal conflict. It really isn't a viable nation as we would know a viable nation. In 1937, they invade China itself, and that began World War II in Asia itself. And then in 1937, the US refuses to trade with Japan until they withdraw from China. Now, the significance of this is that in this period, who is the world's greatest producer of oil? It is the United States. There isn't any Saudi Arabia at that point. There isn't any Middle Eastern oil. There isn't much oil, if any, coming out of the Soviet Union. There's a little bit, but not so much. The Baku oil fields, for example, did have it. But basically, the world's major supplier of petroleum was the United States. And Japan had none, and nothing. Japan is an island nation, set of islands that are barren of natural resources for the most part. And so this caused great conflict on their part and antagonism. In 1940, they invade Indochina, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, which had been French possessions. The US froze Japanese assets and refused to trade for oil, gasoline, and also we were a source of steel for them. And so Japan was greatly disadvantaged as a result of this. So World War II is the rise of totalitarian dictatorships. Fascist aggression occurs in the 10 years from 1931 to 1941. The US, we have a real, we've always had a neutrality psychology. We don't want to mess with these conflicts all over the world. It's something that Washington warned us about, and we managed to avoid them because we had these great big moats on either side of us from the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, so we could remain neutral. There was the weak League of Nations. Japanese expansion began in this period. With the invasion of China, Germany began to expand in various parts of Europe. There's the Munich Conference in 1938. Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, which was a part of Czechoslovakia that had a lot of Germans in it. And if he didn't get it, he was going to go to war. And so they gave it to him. They appeased him. This was Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He flew there, and I think I have a little recording that'll come up in later as words. But appeasement took place. The French and the British gave in to Hitler. They were so weary from World War I. They were tired. They were exhausted financially, emotionally, and so forth. They didn't ever want it to happen again. And so they gave in to Hitler. So, Great Depression. This is what happens after World War I. The Great Depression. The people were jobless. High unemployment rates in all of the countries, weak governments. All of these countries had relatively weak governments. They couldn't solve the problems in their countries. And universally, there was a fear of the Jews and the communists. Now, we morally have taken a high ground in recent years in terms of Semitism and being Jewish in our society. However, if you go back to the 20s, 30s, teens, you would find there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the United States as well. And it was present in France, and it was present in Great Britain. It was pretty universal. It was not just Germany that had anti-Semitism. Communists, this new phenomenon of communism that emerged following World War I, that caused a lot of fear. My mother was born in 1892, and so she was influenced as a young woman by this period. And when she would hate someone, and when she would want to say something despicable about them, she would say, just a bullshit. Because to her, that was the worst thing you could be. There was anti-communism in this country as well as in the world. In social, at times of unrest, people look for a leader. So, dictators, the power of government in a dictatorship rests primarily in one man. Total power, no freedoms in society, usually racist and discriminatory towards certain groups. Often they have large militaries that must expand and conquer in order to gain approval from their people. And so we have totalitarian dictators came to power during the 1920s and 1930s in Europe. They were Adolf Hitler, that you know so much about. They were Benito Mussolini in Italy. They were Joseph Stalin in Russia, in the Soviet Union. They were Francisco Franco in Spain. And one we don't talk about so much, Antonio Salazar in Portugal, another one. Totalitarian dictators have total power. There are no freedoms in this type of society. It's usually racist, discriminatory. Often they have these large militaries. Communism, fascism, and Nazism are all totalitarian dictatorships. I pray we never have it happen again. Nazism and fascism are a philosophy or system of government that advocates for, exercises a dictatorship, state control of industry, racial superiority, supremacy of the leader, limits on civil rights, together with an ideology of belligerent nationalism, militarism, and expansion. They are the opposite of democracy and capitalism. Nazism stands for National Socialist Party. The totalitarian dictatorship in Germany, and fascism is based on a symbol of authority in the old Roman Empire, and that's in Italy. So Stalin, Joseph Stalin, 1921, Soviet Union absolutely then becomes communist. Following World War I, there were the whites and the reds. And the whites were the ones that were resisting, and the reds were the communists, and eventually they do conquer and take over in the Soviet Union. Their goal was to spread communism throughout the world. Now, in the beginning, there were multiple pockets of power. One of the counterparts to Stalin was Trotsky, and Trotsky is outmaneuvered by Stalin by 1929. See, Stalin is not at the beginning that high. Lenin was the leader. Lenin dies. They pickle him and put him under glass in the Soviet Square in Moscow. He's still there. You can go see him, I guess. I've never tried it. I did see Mao in Beijing, pickled under glass. I always just thought after I saw him, you know, he looked very good when he was alive. He didn't look any better when he's dead. But anyway, that decided. I haven't seen the one in Moscow. The Russian Revolution was led by the people to overthrow a monarch, but then when the new ruling class took over, there were no protections for the people. There was no Bill of Rights. They really didn't care about the people. They only cared about power. Communism and fascism there are similar in their ideologies. They are similar in not so much in their ideology as in their methods of exercising the control of their ideology. Stalin's Soviet Union, he had economic plans. This was a backward country. It was an agriculturally, a big agricultural country, but it had very little industrial development. So he began to take the farming, which was fairly productive, and he put them into these large collectives. And the result was that production fell dramatically and there was mass starvation. He poured money and labor into industrialization rather than housing and clothing. And the Soviet Union soon became a modern industrial power. So he succeeded in that way, but with a very low standard of living. He conducted a reign of terror to eliminate his opposition. He began a series of purges and the removal of enemies and undesirable individuals from positions of power. Purges extended to all levels of society. Millions were either executed or sent to forced labor camps. Mr. Putin in Russia right now, many of the people who have been prominent have had mysterious deaths. So have they changed? Maybe not. Nearly all of those that Stalin took care of were probably innocent, but it did eliminate any threat to his power. Benito Mussolini, he came to power in 1922 with his fascism, believe, obey, and fight, revived the whole Roman Empire. And that's where the fascia, based on a symbol of authority in the old Roman Empire, philosophy or system of government that advocates dictatorship, state control, racial superiority, and so forth. Not a good philosophy. Some people say that what we've had in this country is a form of moderate fascism that our esteemed 45th president has probably been a leader of, but I think that may be a little bit of hyperbole. Benito Mussolini gained power in Italy both by advocating the popular idea of Italian conquest in East Africa and terrorizing those who opposed him. Once appointed prime minister by the king, Mussolini called himself El Duce, suspended elections, outlawed other political parties, established a dictatorship. His rule did improve the ailing economy. Under Mussolini, the Italian army successfully conquered the African nation of Ethiopia in 1936, which was one of the oldest nations on Earth, and one of the few that had not been colonized in Africa. He also conquered Albania across the sea from Italy. Antonio Salazar founded the Estado Novo, a new state. The authoritarian right-wing government presided over controlling Portugal from 1932 to 74. It's been described as a far-right leaning regime of para-fascist inspiration. Franco, Spanish military general and head of the state of Spain, de facto regent for the nominally restored Kingdom of Spain till his death. As head of state, he used the title Caudillo de España por la gracia de Dios, meaning the leader of Spain by the grace of God. So, question. Did we have our own homegrown dictator? Many thought so in the 1930s. In the first 100 days, Roosevelt came to power, took office March 12th, 1933. First 100 days, he went to work advocating for relief, recovery, and reform. From March of 1933 to June of 1933, Roosevelt sent 15 proposals to Congress, and all 15 were rubber stamped. Congress and the president wanted to try anything reasonable to overcome the Great Depression. The New Deal, government programs which provided direct relief to the suffering Americans through government spending. It was, in theory, it wanted to renew democracy, to restore confidence in banking. Banking had really suffered greatly. There were thousands of closed banks during this period. Stimulate the economy. My dad used to have some records of two farm communities. There were a couple of banks in each one. And there was one that closed its doors during this period. And I've got some record probably in a file at home where finally 15 years later, he got some small pittance of money back from his account that had been in that closed bank. Put people back to work, restore self-confidence. He relied on social engineers, intellectuals, a brain trust of really deep thinkers, of broad thinkers, of very progressive thinkers, very liberal thinkers, which is an interesting thing for FDR, because if you had really characterized him when he was governor of New York, and in his previous life, he's a patrician. He came from the very upper crust of society. And so if you had characterized him in 1928, you would have called him a conservative Democrat. But of course, he became ultimately the most liberal of liberal Democrats. But he was under the influence of this brain trust, and he had time. He had the luxury that the Depression started in 1929. He doesn't take office until March of 1933. He had time to study and see all these weaknesses, and the brain trust was looking at this as well. And so it would have been very different if he had come to the presidency earlier than he actually did. The 3 R's: relief, ease the suffering of the needy; recovery, begin economic growth; reform, change things that are not working. The unemployment rate reached 24+% at one point during this period. And it was mostly the young and so forth who were out of work. So we had the rise of Adolf Hitler. He was born in Austria. He fought in World War I, and he was bitter towards the Treaty of Versailles. So here's a picture from that period. Which one is Hitler?
First row.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay.
He's the dog.
Yes, that one on the left, that's Hitler. There he is. So I can get that to stay still long enough. So anyway, after the war, his job in the army was to keep tabs on different political parties. He was already showing his anti-Semitic views, discovered a small political party known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazis, begins to work himself into the leadership of that organization. By November of 1923, they thought they had enough power to take over Bavaria. And so there's a beer hall putsch. Hitler and the Nazis tried to overthrow the local government in Munich. Munich putsch was a failed coup d'etat, and Hitler is arrested. And he's convicted in 1924, and he serves 9 months out of a 5-year sentence. And while he's there, he writes a book called Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle. After his release from prison, he continued to work with the Nazi Party to take over Germany, but he's not well liked at that point, and the Nazi Party is not well accepted. And Germany is struggling with other things, and this is just a pesky nuisance, this little party of nothing. These are radicals, so it's why you have to be careful of the radicals and extremists, because if they get a chance, they take over. In 1923, he was arrested and used this trial as an opportunity to gain national attention. His name was in the press all the time, convicted, and he worked out his ideas. He was not taken seriously at first, but as the economy suffers and they're looking for a leader, they're looking for a solution. When you're in pain, you look for something to heal you, and they were promising to be healed. With the help of his Marxist creed, the Jew is victorious over the other peoples of the world. This is something he said in it, by the way. His crown will be the funeral wrath of humanity, and his planet will, as it did thousands of years ago, move through the ether devoid of men. The end is not only the end of freedom of the peoples oppressed by the Jew, but also the end of this parasite upon the nations. After the death of his victim, the vampire sooner or later dies too. This is from Mein Kampf. How many of you ever read it? Anyone here has read it? No?
I read the first page.
Read the first page, okay. Well, you're ahead of many people. So the blueprint was all there. He wrote it all out in advance. It didn't really change. SA and SS Heil, the great time we are now begun. Germany is now awakening, is one of his comments. We won the power in Germany, so forth. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You mustn't act yourself, you must obey, you must give in, you must submit to this overwhelming need to obey. It's January 30th, Adolf Hitler maneuvers to be appointed Chancellor of Germany. They thought they could control him. They thought that they could kind of keep him in a box. but they weren't able to even come close to doing that. He became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, and I think it's kind of ironic in a sense, and maybe that's not the right word, that Hitler comes to power in early January of 1933. Roosevelt comes to power in the same time, March of 1933, and they both die in 1945. So their span of really matches, each one matches the other. He appoints himself dictator, and they staged the burning of the Reichstag, the German parliament, and wants to create a new empire. There's a third Reich. Well, the first Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. The second one was the one that was created from 1871 until the end of the Versailles Treaty. And so he wants to create what he calls the third German empire, so to speak. Revenge towards the Treaty of Versailles, wants to rearm Germany. Germany is, up until World War I, had been one of the great nations of the world. The great universities were there. Great scientific, great industrial development was occurring there. And they had all of these possessions around the world. They were late coming to the business of imperialism, but they made up for it. They had lots of conquered territories around the world. And now that had all been taken away from them. And they also could not have armament anymore. They wanted to take back the land that they had lost in World War II. Hitler wanted Germany to become the third world empire and unite all German-speaking nations, and it would rule the world for 1,000 years. Nazism itself, this is a signal, form is a cross of four equal arms, each bent at a right angle. Word comes from the Sanskrit word swastika, meaning well-being. History, an ancient Aryan symbol of the sun. It's hard to make the connection between what they were using as Aryans. The Aryans were really from India area, northern India and so forth. But basically, if there's a connection, it is that they viewed themselves as the chosen ones, as the insiders, and everyone else was non-Aryan. And so this was intellectuals of this time took this idea and bent it so that it became used. It's very complicated to study and to really trace this connection of the intellectual development of all of this. They adopt the swastika and they begin to talk about themselves as the master race, the blonde-haired, tall, just, all looking like that kind of classic Nordic kind of person. Of course, not everybody looked like that, but that's what they tried to persuade themselves that they believed. Nazis used a political police that they called the brown shirts in the beginning. Later, they used the Gestapo, the SS Corps. They used these powers very, very arbitrarily. And they used whatever propaganda, skilled propaganda, to gain total power. Anti-Nazi leaders were arrested. They violated the privacy of postal and telephonic communications. They did not need search warrants to go into your house and search or confiscate or restrict private property. There was no Bill of Rights, believe me. Freedoms were lost. The freedom of speech. Nazis censored what you could read. Due process. Could be arrested without probable cause. No trial by jury. They practiced racism and persecution towards the Jews. They were stripped of civil rights. The Jews were no longer citizens. Books are weapons in the war of ideas. Common enemy. Hitler blamed the Jews and communists for problems of Germany, the loss of World War I, Germany's economic depression. The Jews were identified as a race and not a religion. There was extensive anti-Semitism and new education began. They wanted to save the purity of the German race. Aryan virtues were explained in the Nuremberg laws, and we're going to see a few of those. There were two phases of hatred. Phase one was 33 to 39. common and they were going to re-educate everyone. So people were thinking properly. Re-education. Citizenship rights were defined. German Jews often faced deportation if they were lucky. The violence escalates into, finally, we know the Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And I think I have a video coming up about that if it's going to work. Phase 2 was 1939 until it ends in 1945. That's World War II. And the final solution, ghettos and forced labor camps, mass executions of the Jews and Eastern Europeans, the Einsatzgruppen death squads. In the beginning, they did not have the gas chambers. The Einsatzgruppen were the ones who were sent out with rifles, so basically to line people up in before a pit to shoot them. And they did this for a long time in large numbers, I don't know how many, but thousands and tens of thousands probably. But they ultimately, the Germans being efficient, they are one thing, the Germans are efficient. And this was not an efficient way to exterminate those Jews. And so that's why they came up with the final solution, which was, whatever you may hate about the gas chambers, it was an efficient way to extinguish humanity by the tens of thousands, ultimately millions. Gas chambers mostly, therefore, did not come about until after 1942. It took them a while before they were going to get these underway. Anti-Jewish, the hatred of Jews and their culture and religion, and great hostility towards Jews in whatever shape possible. The Jews were defined by German policies as alien, evil, and not capable of being corrected. They were historically the virus which aided the purity of the nation, the Christian Aryans. They were the international conspirators whose aim was to overthrow Christian Western civilization. It was ugly. The Jew, it's what this piece of literature says, the Jew, the inciter of war, the prolonger of war. And of course, their picturing of the Jew is as negative a characterization as you could possibly come up with. German children were taught in school that Jews were inferior. The Nuremberg laws, policy of anti-Semitism, purity of German blood was essential to the existence of the German people. The Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935 and gave a legal basis. Now they could justify all these things that they were doing. Millions of Jews died in these German concentration camps, and that happened before the Holocaust itself. Yes.
Yeah, where did the homosexuals come in, exterminating them? Were they put in any of the laws?
They were always viewed negatively in all societies, pretty much, including our own, have always been viewed negatively. Numerically, they probably were not so great. We focus on that because we have a sensitivity to it. I've never really researched exactly what numbers we're talking about, but you could pass for being straight. Right. And if you could, you would. Right. But those who were identified were certainly out of society's acceptance, and so they were then persecuted. But I don't think they really did much with that until we get closer to the Holocaust itself.
What about the brown shirts? Wasn't one leader of the brown shirts?
The brown shirts, I can't exactly cite how that worked out. They became suspicious of their leader. Somebody help me with his name.
Roman?
What?
Roman?
Yeah, Roman.
Bowman.
Yeah, thank you. He was building his own power base. And so the other parts of the Nazi movement decided that he had to go, the brown shirts had to disappear. And so they were basically eliminated and replaced with the SS and Gestapo. And then some of those people who were brown shirts get moved into the Gestapo and into the SS. But the brown shirts from 1933 or 4 disappeared. They had one night when they shot all of the leaders of the brown shirts.
Night of the Long Knives.
Light of the Long Knives, thank you. Here are some of the Nuremberg laws. Marriages between Jews and of German blood are forbidden. Sexual relations outside of marriage between Jews and German blood are forbidden. Jews will not be permitted to employ female servants of German blood as servants. Jews are forbidden to display the Reich and national flag. Jewish children in German were segregated. The right to citizenship is acquired by the granting of Reich citizenship papers. Only the citizen of the Reich enjoys full political rights. A citizen of the Reich is of German blood and who shows that he's both desirous and fit to serve the German people and Reich faithfully. Now, I hope this is going to work.
Press comes to an end. This year, they say there are 800,000 pairs of feet standing heel to heel, waiting for the Führer's final speech. And the spot comes when, after a detailed review of Nazi achievements, Hitler cries, "My life's fight has not been in vain."
Mein Lebenskampf ist nicht umsonst gekämpft. Wenn Sowjetzeichen vor die Herren von vielen Sternen die Reiche China siegen.
Well, the one thing the Germans were good at is putting on a show, and that was
an example of the way they would put on a show. So the Night of Broken Glass, 1938, German official policy, persecution of the Jews resulted in this. It was becoming dangerous to be a Jew in Germany. In the beginning, the Jews felt that they could adapt. They could live with this, and so they would accommodate personally. And then they would have to accommodate a little bit more. And, nobody wants to leave your home or your neighborhood or your friends, and so you stay. Now, some didn't, some left, but too many stayed. And eventually, like the boiled frog syndrome, they couldn't get out anymore. So the first organized night of Nazi violence against the German Jews, November 8th and 9th of 38. Thousands were arrested, including college professors, writers, doctors, Jewish businesses, stores, homes, and so forth. Nazi violence against the German Jews led to thousands hurt and many dead. Violence escalated with systematic invasions. There is a map that shows Kristallnacht, the nationwide pogrom, November 9th and 10th, 1938. These are dots representing cities where synagogues were destroyed. And of course, this doesn't even show all of them, but you can see it was pretty much all over the country. It was a very organized effort at horror.
Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, was the wave of violent anti-Jewish pogroms on November 9th and 10th of 1938. It took place throughout Germany, annexed Austria, and in areas of Czechoslovakia recently occupied by German troops. Kristallnacht owes its name to the shards of shattered glass from the windows of synagogues, homes, and Jewish-owned businesses that lined German streets in the wake of the pogrom. On November 7, 1938, Ernst von Rath, a German embassy official stationed in Paris, was assassinated by Herschel Grimspan, a 17-year-old Polish Jew living illegally in Paris. Grimspan revengefully shot the diplomat after witnessing the expulsion of not only his parents, but thousands of Jews of Polish citizenship living in the German Reich. Von Rath died on November 9, 1938. The same day, at a meeting of Nazi Party leadership, propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, the chief instigator of the Kristallnacht pogroms, suggested that world Jewry had conspired to commit the assassination and ordered that any demonstration, while not organized by the Nazi Party, shall not be hampered. Newspapers reported otherwise. After Goebbels' speech, violence erupted in various parts of the Reich. Paramilitary, or SA, and Hitler Youth units throughout Germany and its annexed territories destroyed Jewish-owned homes and businesses. Jewish artifacts were confiscated, and many young, healthy Jewish men were arrested and filled local jails. The rioters destroyed 267 synagogues throughout Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. Many synagogues burned throughout the night in full view of public and of local firefighters who had received orders to intervene only to prevent flames from spreading to nearby buildings. SA and Hitler Youth members.
Okay, well, this is a very long video, and I think we'll see all of it, but you get the idea of what was happening. It was a time of true terror, and you can imagine the psychological impact of this beyond the physical so as well. So let's just turn our attention to Japan for a moment. Their emperor had been really elevated to the level of a god, Emperor Hirohito at this time. Japan believed it had a manifest destiny. It believed it had a manifest destiny to expand into China and into the rest of Asia. And they called themselves the Empire of the Sun. The man who was called upon to become really their prime minister was Hideki Tojo. And this was a man who had been educated in the United States. He understood us pretty well, actually. 1931, Japan expansionist and military leader. The history of Japanese politics during this time is one of a lot of assassinations, by the way. It was dangerous to be a leader in Japan. Would threaten our island possessions and the U.S. trade policy into China, where we had an open door policy. That was our policy towards China. All nations should be able to freely trade and have economic activity there. So they had growing military power. Their democracy is in crisis. After World War I, Japan had established a parliamentary government and granted many citizens the right to vote. They hadn't had that up until that time. Economic conditions worsened for them as well during the 1930s, and they became dissatisfied with this multi-party democratic government. Nationalism, several radical groups formed in response to the government's perceived weakness. The radicals demanded an end to Western-style institutions and a return to traditional ways, make Japan, Japan. These radicals assassinated many business and political leaders, hoping to force the military government to take over. Manchurian incident occurs. By 1930, Japan lacked the land, raw materials to care for its growing population. Many Japanese saw the acquisition of neighboring Manchuria as a solution to these problems. In September of 1931, a Japanese army stationed in Manchuria captured several cities. By February of 1932, the army had seized all of Manchuria. This seizure became known as the Manchurian Incident. They set it up as a puppet state, an independent government supposedly governed under the benevolent guidance of their neighbor. After the Manchurian incident, the military took a much stronger hand in governing Japan, especially in foreign policy. So why Manchuria? Who gives a darn about Manchuria? What's there? Well, The important military resources of Manchuria include coal, iron, dolomite, magnesite, aluminous shale, oil shale, structural and chemical raw materials, gold, and so forth and so on. Lots of minor metals and materials. Also a source for soybean, bean cake, and coal, most important of all. It ranks second as a source of pig iron, supplying about 250,000 tons annually, as well as a bunch of other stuff. Manchuria was really important to them because remember, especially for 1937, we're cutting off their oil. And so it becomes even more important. The oil, by the way, they're going to get that out of Indonesia. That's one of the places that has some oil that they will want. Fascist aggression. Between 1931 to 41, Japan controlled most of Asia and was threatening U.S. islands and our open door trade policy. And of course, remember the Philippines are controlled by the United States at this point, as well as Guam and some other places. 1935 to 39, Hitler rearmed Germany during this period in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany conquered all of the democracies in Eastern Europe. U.S. policy was strict neutrality. There were people who were organizing. Charles Lindbergh in particular was a leader of the neutrality people in our country. So again here, 1931 into Manchuria, 37 the war starts. We refuse to trade with them. 1940 they invade Indochina and we freeze their assets. So this is how big Japan becomes by the time we get in the 39 to 45 period. As you can see, their reach is great. And those of us who live here in Florida, most of us are landlocked, landlubbers as the phrase is used. We're not really familiar with how big oceans are. And if we think of the Atlantic Ocean outside of our doorstep here as being huge, the Pacific Ocean is enormous, really enormous. And in the 1930s, the ability to do anything quickly across that ocean was a major challenge. And that's why when we finally go to war, we knew we could not have an easy confrontation, direct confrontation with Japan. And so we adopted what's called an island hopping strategy. That's why when you read the history of military history of World War II, we try to conquer one island, consolidate, then move on to another island, consolidate. And we were finally getting close to Japan when we have the bloody Iwo Jima, which was just south of Japan, because that would be our base for then moving into Japan when we had to actually go in directly, which was planned. From 1924 to 33 in Germany, they had the Weimar Republic, which was a good idea, but poorly governed, poorly led. It just doesn't really work very well. Germany expands from 1935 to 39, unopposed under the League of Nations. They take over the Rhineland in 1936 and Austria in 1938. And there's the Rhineland. That land was supposed to remain neutral with no military forces in it whatsoever, and they just bowl over that. And then, of course, they take over Austria to the south. Not much opposed because many of the people who are in Austria are really German or German oriented. The Sudetenland is this little thin part of Czechoslovakia that has a substantial number of Germans in it. Notice the breakdown here in Czechoslovakia. It's 7.5 million Czechs. But it also has 3.2 million Germans, 2.3 million Slovaks, Magyars, Ruthenes, and Poles. It's an odd conglomeration. And eventually Czechoslovakia breaks into two parts. Because it too it's an artificial creation of people who did not really want to be together. There's the Sudetenland. The leaders met in Munich to decide the fate of Czechoslovakia. Hitler believed the Sudetenland should be part of Germany. Adolf Hitler from Germany, Neville Chamberlain from England, and Premier Edouard Daladier from France. Benito Mussolini was there as well. And Hitler promised the world, you give me the Sudetenland and I have no more territorial ambitions. That's all I want. I just want to get our lovely German people into Germany. Germany, so all I want is Germany for Germans. Peace at any cost, Chamberlain says, believed that by sacrificing Czechoslovakia, he had satisfied Hitler and would stop his aggression. It was appeasement. And these are his words.
The German Chancellor, Hitler. Here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
And I could have a video that shows that, but it just shows him waving the paper, and that's near the end of his premiership or prime ministership in Great Britain. So FDR sends a letter to Hitler asking him to honor the Munich Conference. Later in 1939, Hitler invades and takes the rest of Czechoslovakia. I've got Sudetenland, I'll just take the rest. Nobody says anything. The United States learned at the Munich Conference that you just cannot trust the words of a dictator. What is the cartoonist trying to say here? We must be careful not to offend Hitler. If we're nice to him, maybe he'll leave us alone. We stand together, might appear unfriendly. We might as well try to appease him. Maybe Nazism isn't so bad. We try to rationalize, well, it gotta be okay. It can't be all that bad. So appeasement, giving in to someone, it never works in the long run. Period. The rest is history, so they say. And so that is record time doing a lot of stuff. So thank you.